Welcome to Verbal Pick Radio. We give you a verbal image of life, and we are everyday people. Like to welcome you all to the show. Today we're going to discuss a very important topic. But before we do, I'd like to thank Brother Low Key for bringing my attention to this subject. And also, I'd like to thank High Frequency, Graphics, Brother Abdul and his family, everybody that participated in Everyday People, the movie, Tay. You know what I'm saying? Erica Badu, Karis, one. Also, I'd like to thank Melvin Show for the support of the movie. And, a lot of people out there, man, we getting ready to get started on this. Now, Brother Low Key sent me this article about Abraham Lincoln. It was back in 1855. He was defending a man by the name I believe William Dungy. Let's go back and look. But we'll get started, though. It states, my client is not, now, this is Abraham Lincoln. My client is not a Negro, though it is a crime to be a Negro. Abraham Lincoln, Esquire, 1855. Let's go on. In 1855, Joseph Spencer was feuding with his sister's husband, William Dungy, as is often the case with many family feuds. Things looked and got ugly and turned when Spencer accused his brother-in-law of being a Negro. So Spencer accused William Dungy of being a Negro. Even today, some non-U.S. born people consider it an offense to be mistaken for being a black American. Despite the fact that many immigrants also trace their ancestry back to the African continent before the travesty of slave trade, many are emphatically opposed to the ideal of being stripped of their ethno-national identity upon arrival in the United States. For them to be recognized as an American black person is a reference to the loss of ethnic identity and experience with which they refuse or cannot identify. Rundown on that. See a lot of people from El Salvador, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Brazil, Cuba, Colombia, the Caribbean islands. When you see their grandparents and family members be dark with little curly woolly hair, they tend to defute the fact that they are definitely descendants of heavy melanated people, black people. But it could be, and I believe that it's just the stigmatism of slavery, which they don't want to. They're ashamed of their slave past. So a lot of them tend to say, "Well, I'm Colombian. I'm not the black. I'm not the black." But in fact, you look at them and like, "Well, damn, those features you have, they only come from Africa. Where'd you get them?" But we'll continue. The experiential reality today is born out of the legislative reality of yesterday. Meaning what we have today came from yesterday. Or yesterday was the shoulders that today stands upon. When Joseph Spencer accused his brother-in-law of being a Negro, it was more than just an insult. In 1855, if believed by local officials, an accusation of being called Negro would have resulted in the loss of his marriage, property, and his right to continue to live in the state of Illinois. This is 1855. If your status was Negro in 1855, you were reduced down to a vagabond, nothing. Just 2 years earlier, the Illinois legislature passed the infamous Black Codes, following a directive of the 1848 state constitution to pass such laws as will effectively prohibit free persons of color from immigrating to and settling in this state. The legislators not only prohibited free persons of color from immigrating to the state, but continued to build on the precedent established by other states by declaring that 1/4 Negro blood defines a mulatto or makes a black man. 1/4 Negro blood. Now, 1/4, remember that as we continue. 1/4 Negro blood is the same as being called a mulatto or a Negro. Y'all got that? That makes a black man. Negro, black man, mulatto, all the same thing. Now we know actually what a black person is. He may be the offspring of an African or be the child of a person purely of European extraction. Now, this is coming from 1855 definitions. I'm gonna read that again, though, so you don't think that. And this is coming off the Huffington Post. I want to read this again so you don't think I'm making it up. Now, we know actually what a black person is, right? This is what a black person is by their definition. He may be the offspring of an African or be the child of a person purely of European extraction with another European whose father or mother was an African. This is Zebna Eastman, the Illinois Black Code. This is coming from the Black Codes in the day. I mean, it's blowing my mind of the process and the mindset that these people had in identifying people. Look, with an African or be the child of a person purely of European extraction, because the European is an extraction from the black person, a grafted process, but we'll get into that another day, of European extraction with another European whose father or mother was an African, meaning that an African or black person, African, whatever, could have a child with a white person. Then that child marries a white person, has another child. That child that they had, it would be considered mulatto, black, or Negro. It would not have any rights. That's what I'm trying to get to. That's the point. Okay, come on, let's continue. William Dungy had no choice but to respond to what he considered to be a slanderous act. His brother-in-law had dubbed him Black Bill, and it was causing him harm. In October 1854, Dungy retained 46-year-old attorney Abraham Lincoln to respond to his brother-in-law's libel. In April 1855, Lincoln filed suit against Spencer, and after some legal wrangling, a hearing was set for the following May. Spencer's attorneys, Cliff H. Moore and Lawrence Weldon, immediately went out to build their case against Dungy, which was set for October 1855. They traveled back to Dungy's hometown of Giles County, Giles County, Tennessee, to depose people who claimed to know his family. Lincoln was prepared with a defense that memorialized his superior legal mind, elevated the complexity of the social construct of race, and emphasized the criminalization of being a Negro or black person in the United States. We getting close, but that's another problem. When we start defining ourselves by their law, if you say I'm a black man or I'm a Negro, in their eyes, you have no rights. But let's say by their definition. But they're saying if you call yourself a black or a Negro, then what you actually saying is that my ancestors was white. Hold on. Now, Lincoln's argument was simple. He was saying that, let me show you. Okay. His argument was simple. Lincoln was saying that Dungy was not a Negro. He was not black because his ancestral origins were of Portuguese descent. Now, who are the Portuguese? We'll go back into that in a minute, but he said that he was not black because his ancestral origins were of Portuguese descent, not the ambiguous, non-specific ancestry of being Negro or black. Because, as you know, that's why they call the Portuguese were swarthy, because swartz means black. They were dark-skinned Portuguese mixing with the Moors, and from Portugal to Spain. The Moors was your daddy, Spain and Portugal. Okay, we're going to keep going. This is Lincoln. This is a quote from President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. Y'all work with me on this because it's profound, and this is new information to a lot of us. So I got to put it out gently so we can all comprehend what's actually being stated here. My client is not a Negro, though it is a crime to be a Negro. Now, this is 1848, 1850, on up to the 1860s and 1900s, even till today, so you can get an understanding of what's going on. My client is not a Negro, though it is a crime to be a Negro. No crime to be born with a black skin. Look, there's no crime if you're born with black skin, no. The crime is if you are a Negro. Okay, let's go on. I'm going to repeat that. No crime to be born with a black skin, but my client is not a Negro. His skin may not be as white as ours, but I say he is not a Negro, though he may be a Moor. Wait a minute. Abraham Lincoln is saying he's not a Negro. This man is a Moor. What's the difference? We'll continue to read. Mr. Lincoln interrupted Judge Davis, scarcely able to restrain a smile. You mean a Moor, not Moor. Well, Your Honor, Moor, not C.H. Moore, replied Mr. Lincoln with a sweep of his long arm toward the table where Moore and I sat. I say my client may be a Moor, but he is not a Negro. That's profound, and it's very interesting. Slavery still in full effect in much of the nation. Lincoln was not seeking to absolve all people with skin that might be misinterpreted as black of the crime of being Negro. Let's go back, man. Let's go back. Lincoln was not seeking to absolve all people with skin that might be misinterpreted as black of the crime of being Negro. See, if you have, and this is what's not taught to black people in America, if you have, dog skin, and if you have heavy melanated skin, that doesn't mean that you're a Negro or black. That could be stating the fact that you are indeed a Moor, and we'll get into the definition and title of what the Moor is. as we continue on. Look, he was simply drawing a distinction that one who could identify their ancestral origins of something other than black to a specific culture, people, group, or nation was not subject to the same statutes that govern those who were or had been married or marred, those who were or had been marred with the shameful badge of blackness. Despite the defendant's claim that the white community in Dungy's hometown considered he and his family to be Negro or of mixed blood, Lincoln pointed out that no one who lived within 30 miles of the plaintiff was present to testify to that effect. Lincoln drew the distinction that not only was Dungy not Negro or black, but that he quite possibly was of Moorish ancestry by way of his Portuguese descendant that would account for his skin tone but separate him from the domesticated amalgamation that defined those who were still in or who had emerged from the bounds of American captivity. So what America was saying, and Abraham Lincoln was saying, that, and this goes back into the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, of how when the first slaves arrived in 1555 on a slave ship titled Jesus by Sir John Hardy Hawkins, that first group, the white women, the white men raped the black women. Then the babies from that process of rape was raised, taught, and reared by white women and taught them Christianity and this new way of life. And then they was dubbed Negro, black, and whatnot. Because after that white man raped their sister, then they married that baby off into the white society. Then the children from those babies that was produced were the slaves, Negro. Then they was doing that process over and over again. Now the blacks that was already here in America were like, we're Moors. We didn't have anything to do with this breeding process that you all disposed upon these people, African people. But what people fail to realize is, as time, the white man couldn't distinguish between the Moor, the Aborigines, the Olmecs, the native black Americans that was here, the American Indians that Columbus called them, but the indigenous that came into the Americas by way of the Thule Indians, they couldn't distinguish, so they just put everybody in slavery. That was the point. They just dropped everybody in slavery. Now look, scholarship on the ethnic origins of the Moors is quite broad, but most agree that the Moorish people are themselves an amalgamation of 17th century of North African, Arab, Sub-Saharan, and West African descent, who migrated to Spain and then Portugal over the next 7 centuries. By the 15th century, the African slave trade in full swing. Hold on, let me stop right there. They didn't, okay, if you want to call the conquering of Spain and Portugal, because as the Visigoths moved into that land, and first they took it from the original inhabitants, which was black. The Visigoths coming up out of Europe took Spain and Portugal. Then, as word went to Carthage and Rome and Africa and North Africa, the black Moors came and took Spain and Portugal back again. That was the true history of how that took place. So don't see. You got to watch some of these historians, because at the end of the day, they always got to turn it a degree towards their ideology or white supremacy. And but it also shows you that the North African blacks were the original Arabs, sub-Saharan and West African descents before the race mixing that took place in the Middle East. Okay, there you go. Now, Portuguese colonies were thriving in South America by the 16th century. That's why you see a lot of, it's one of the reasons why you see a lot of, why the language of Spanish is spoken due to the Portuguese and the Spanish. And you ask a lot of Hispanics, Mexicans in Mexico, have you been to Spain? You been to Portugal? Why you speaking Spanish? What's your original language that you spoke before you were conquered by the Spanish and the Portuguese? They get upset. Don't you know your forefather was black? They get upset, but facts is fact. We ain't got time to be worried about folks' feelings and emotions here. Okay, now look. Okay, in South America, and by the 16th century, they were arriving in North America. This was also the peak of the Ottoman Empire, which found reluctant allies in the slave trade with the European states. The result of this difficult alliance resulted in the early arrival of the Turks in the New World. That's why you get the word turkey on Thanksgiving Day. You have turkey because of that piece of meat that hangs on side the turkey head, remind them of the Moorish fez. So they dubbed the turkey the Turk from Turkey. Okay, by the late 17th century, the first English colony of Virginia was faced with the daunting task of trying to reconcile and take reconcile. Daunting task of trying to reconcile and take census of the many people groups that it found in the region, as it set its sights towards legislated enslavement of people with visible volumes of melanin. That was what took place. If you had a visible volumes of melanin, they just assumed that you were black, Negro. Let me restate that. If you had 1/4 black, that would be considered a visible volume of melanin compared to white skin, because you were a tad bit tanner, and they could tell that, and you were put in slavery. But what happened was, Abraham Lincoln was like, well, wait, hold up, since he was dubbed the Moor as well, he was like, well, hold on, you just can't say that, because his ancestry could be tied to the Moors, who are free and without ways free. And that was a fight, and we'll get into that a little later. In November 1682, legislation was passed that forged all Negroes, Moors, mulattoes, or Indians into a new racial classification of Negro. In November of 1862, legislation was passed that forged all Negroes, all Moors, all mulattoes, or Indians into a new racial classification of Negro, all servants except Turks and Moors. Again, the scholarship is quite broad on the reasoning for this distinction, but some point to unspoken agreements with North African rulers during the Ottoman Empire that in later years would be codified in a series of treaties known as the Barbary Treaties. The treaties dated from the late 18th century through the near mid-19th century, set forth a number of agreements that provided certain civil and religious protection to those who arrived in early America from North Africa. So basically, we'll get back in part 2 of this a little later. But I just basically wanted to let you all know that it's a lot of history that's being cooked up. Things are being put on the table as today. All this ties into reparations, and we'll continue a part 2 at a later date. Hopefully I can get Brother Low Key on with me, and we can go a little bit further into this. This is just the pre-game warm-up. This the warm-up before the big show. Vero Pick Radio, we're out.